We're starting again after lunch, and I'd like to welcome back the Australian Energy Market Operator. You keep going. I'll bring the
party home. Okay, all right. Now, I wanted to ask a little bit about, we covered this a little bit last time, but drill down a bit more on the assumptions of the ISP. My understanding is that the 82% renewable energy target by 2030 is a constraint imposed in the ISP. Is that right?
So the ISP in 2024 included the policies that were set out in our documentation. That did include the 82% by 2030 policy and its implementation.
Right. I mean, I think you've said, or you hinted at earlier, do you consider that you have to do this given the national electricity rules?
What we take into account is those policies, the national electricity rules and the way in which we are required to consider those, and then the approach that we have taken in preparing the ISP is to include those policies that are in the target statement, particularly those policies that are able to be modelled in our modelling process. Right.
I presume that the key part of the rules here are the bits that say must consider this 5.22.3b, where, oh, hang on, sorry, I got the wrong one there. But there's a, sorry, yeah, it is right. I think I was looking at the old one. 5.22.3b, which says that you must consider the emissions reduction target stated in the target statements. Is that the one?
Yes, that is an operative clause for the way in which we choose and apply our approach to modelling policies that are to be included in the integrated system plan modelling. Okay,
so you take the 82% renewable energy target as an emissions reduction target?
It's included in the target statement, and so that clause that you're referring to says that we must consider the clauses that are in the target statement, and given that's included in the target statement, then it is one of those that we are required to consider.
To be precise, it says must consider the emission reduction targets in the target statement. It doesn't refer to any other targets or policies that may or may not be included in the target statement. So for that to be the operative clause for the 82% targets consideration, you must then consider the 82% renewable energy target to be an emissions reduction target, do you?
We consider it to be included in the target statement, and so we consider it in conjunction with all of the other policies that are included in the target statement.
Right. Okay. It's not particularly clear to me, but the words "must consider" are a little strange. I mean, obviously that means you must consider it, but it doesn't necessarily preclude you, I would have thought, from considering other things, like modelling other scenarios. Does it not? Doesn't bind you to...
So the way in which we approach the inclusion of policies in the integrated system plan is that, and this relates, I guess, to the way in which the emissions reduction was included in the national electricity objectives in particular, also in the other energy objectives. So at that time when emissions reduction was included in the electricity objective, there was a lot of activity and discussion that went on around that, in addition to the actual legislative process. And there was a series of information and discussions about the preparation of the target statement. There was the rule changes that were put through, which the AEMC considered. And I guess in the context of all of that, we had to look at, well, how do we approach that from a preparation of the integrated system plan. The timing of this was that all of those considerations were happening around the middle of 2023, which was when we were in the process of finalising the inputs, assumptions and scenarios report. We then go on to prepare the integrated system plan modelling, and it's a critical time at which we need to consider what are we including and what aren't we. It was very clear that emissions reduction was going to be included in the national electricity objectives as it was in the other energy objectives. And so we I guess we took an approach that we wanted to make sure that the integrated system plan, when it was published in the middle of 2024, so basically 12 months later, that it was relevant, that it was up to date, and it was reflective of the policies that were going to be in existence and applying at that time. And so making sure that we were aware of all of the policies, how they were flowing through into our modelling was a critical element that informed the approach with which we took modelling things that were included in the target statement and other material that was provided to us.
Right. I've got an email here that was sent from an AEMO official on the 19th of July 2023. The exact person is redacted. It's an FOI document. The subject is IASR Policy Inclusion Summary. The email is addressed to Justin in, I think, the Department of Climate Change, by the look of it. And again, things are redacted. And the first substantive sentence says, "It was our initial intention to treat the renewable share as a free variable." So was it AEMO's initial intention not to impose a binding constraint of 82% renewables?
I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of that email.
Okay, happy to get that tabled.
To hand,
I'll have to just take a second to get that to the Secretariat, sorry. What's the email again? What's the acronym? EPRA. Oh, here it is. It has come up. I thought it would come up automatically, which it has now. Just took a while. Not wanting to work for me. So at the very least, and maybe you could answer me, did you have a discussion with the... Oh, here we go. Did you have a discussion with the department about the way the 82% renewable energy target would be treated in the ISP?
What I can say is that I personally did not have a discussion with the department about that. It would not... It would be very normal and reasonable for the preparation of the ISP, in the course of the preparation of the ISP, for us to engage with all jurisdictions, including the Commonwealth Department, on what are their policies, what do they actually mean, how will they be measuring them, and that would be to inform how we, how we would then measure them, because there's, as I'm sure you'd be... you recognise there's no point in us measuring it in one way if it's actually going to be measured in a completely different way. So conversations, it would be very normal and reasonable for conversations to occur between the team, my team, who are preparing the integrated system plan and the detailed modelling, to have discussions about what does the policy intent mean and how does it actually work.
This issue goes to the independence that Senator Grogan was asking about earlier. I mean, independent of this correspondence, which we'll get for you shortly, was it the original intention of AEMO to treat renewables as a free variable in the ISP modelling? This is in mid-2023?
There were a range of policies in existence even at that time. So if we go to net zero by 2050, that was not treated as a free variable. Right,
but I'm asking about the 82% target. What was it considered? Even if it was considered, let's put aside the intention. Did AEMO have a consideration of whether or not the renewable share would be a free variable in the modelling?
It may have been. I don't know the details of that. What I can say, though, Senator, is
who was in charge of these assumptions? It's a pretty big assumption. Who ultimately had to take responsibility for the inputs into the ISP?
So what I could say is the ISP is a repeat exercise. So what is not a policy in the inclusion in one integrated system plan, so for example in the 2022 integrated system plan, this wasn't a policy, it wasn't in place, and the amount of renewable generation...
With all respect, Ms York, this is not... we're running down the clock, and I know that's your intention, but it's not going to my question. My question simply is, like, the evidence you've given us to date is that you have to model these things because the national electricity rules say so, and we're clearly looking into things like the national electricity rules. But it would seem from your own internal correspondence and external correspondence, or external correspondence to the department, that you were not only considering not taking them as a binding target, but actually intending not to. So this correspondence undermines the evidence you've given this committee to date that somehow the national electricity rules bind your hands to only consider the government policies that are adopted of the day.
So what I would say, Senator, is that at some point everything changes from not being binding to being binding. And the timing of that is obviously determined by a range of inputs. So whether that's when it actually becomes policy, when it actually becomes a legislative commitment, when there's budget applied. So I would have to go back to the team to understand.
Sure, things change obviously with governments, but this is in mid-2023. It was clear that the government had a policy target of 82% renewables. They took that to the election. They were implementing that by mid-2023. I don't see how the National Electricity Rules bind you to only consider. It doesn't say only consider, it just says must consider these things. You could clearly have scope to consider other things if relevant. It's clear to me, unless you can provide evidence to the contrary, that you were considering modelling other assumptions and scenarios, and some things seem to change. And you've only considered the one scenario of renewables, which is an 82% renewable target by 2030.
Yeah. As I said before, Senator, what was happening at that time was the inclusion of emissions reduction in the National Electricity Objective. There was a lot of discussion around what that means and how it would work, how it would come into the National Electricity Rules, how that would apply not only to the ISP but also to a range of other work, not only that we were doing but other market bodies were doing. So there was quite a lot of discussion about that. We then had to consider what does that mean in terms of the approach that we would take for the ISP, and the approach that we take is to include all of the policies that are set in the target statement, and I guess in that sense we are informed by things such as the AEMC's final determination on the harmonisation rules, which is the changes in the rules that came about following the inclusion of the National Electricity Objective, emissions reduction in the NEO. And so there were a range of things that we were considering in informing the approach that we took, and the communications that existed at the time were very clear that we should be thinking about that in a way that applied those target statement policies and applied them across all of the scenarios in the ISP. So we can. There would have been a time when we weren't considering it as a binding item, and then we were considering it as a binding item, and that is a normal.
So you
can.
The rules allow you to consider not choosing. From what you just said, the rules allow you to consider not choosing a government policy target as a binding. The approach
that we take with the ISP is that emissions reductions are one thing, and what we really want to know is what does that mean for the power system. So emissions reduction doesn't mean that you know how many generators need to change, what level of generation we're going to get from the different fuel sources. We actually need to use that information to inform.
This is key, though. This is key. I'll come back to why it's key. I just want to finish this line. Hopefully the Secretary has another email, an email from the Department on the 29th of June, Kim Collins, the acting branch head in the Department. And he replied to you, I think replied, or at least, yeah, it seems to be a reply, said that our preference, it's not that one, you've got that one now in front of you, but this is a separate one that hopefully is being printed. Our preference is that the target is included as a that's the target of the 82% renewable target. Our preference is that the target is included as a policy commitment in the IASR, with an assumption that the 82% national target translates to an 82% target for the NEM. That's what the department told you on the 29th of June. Now, that's what you've implemented. And so it would seem to me very clearly that you're taking your writing instructions from the department here. That you had an intention of modelling a range of scenarios, but the department's told you, no, our preference is for this, and that's what you've done.
So we would certainly be having conversations with all departments about the policies to inform ourselves as to what is the status of the policy, what's the status of their legislation that might be implementing that, budget considerations, etc. How is it measured? And we would form our own view as to whether that would be included in our modelling, and in terms of the target statement and the information that surrounded all of the other activities associated with the inclusion of emissions reduction in the NEO, we have taken an approach that we need to be able to communicate and be transparent about what that actually means for the power system. And so what do you need to do in the power system in terms of generation sources, storage, transmission, to deliver on those target statements, emissions, levels of renewable, etc., so that people can be informed of what actually needs to happen in the power system if you're going to be implementing those policies. And that is really what we see as a key purpose of the ISP, is to, well, what needs to happen and how do you get to those policies at the lowest cost overall to consumers, and make sure that everyone's informed of what that actually looks like.
Right. Okay. Well, look, I'm not sure if I'm any clearer, but all the evidence to us, I think, at this stage seems to indicate you have chosen the assumptions for the ISP based on the wishes of the government, which somewhat colours then the conclusions of this document. Obviously, that's what the correspondence clearly shows. A whole lot of correspondence I don't have time to go into, but it's quite comical. You were desperately asking the department for clarification, and they just seemed to refuse to engage, and eventually you rolled over and did what they wanted. Just to take how important this is, on the the ISP, I think I've got a quote here from your ISP. You say the biggest driver for the need to deliver HumeLink is the inclusion of several policies such as the Powering Australia plan, which targets 82% variable renewable energy by 2030, and the model carbon budget which further limits coal generation. So the inclusion now of what we now know as $5 billion and counting of cost is based on this assumption choice, which was driven by the department for political reasons. Given the importance of that assumption that you've admitted to, why haven't you modelled other scenarios that don't include 82% renewables as a binding constraint?
So one of the things that the ISP is particularly trying to do is to make sure that we're clear on what the power system needs, how the power system needs to change to meet the inputs, assumptions and scenarios that we model. As I've said, the approach that we have taken is that what's included in the target statement, that it's useful for people to understand what that is going to take in the power system to meet those requirements. And so with those as an input, we then want to see how the power system needs to evolve, what generation needs to come on, what storage is required, what transmission would be developed to meet that requirement at the lowest cost to consumers. That is the basis of our modelling, and that we also test not through scenarios but through sensitivities the robustness of those assumptions. So we will look at other variables in terms of that. So it could be supply chain. We do one about supply chain limitations. We do one around increases in costs. We do one around lower demand uptake, for example, lower levels of EV uptake, and we're really trying to test whether the projects and the outlook that is presented is robust to a range of variations in the assumptions that we make. And that is really the key purpose of the ISP in terms of being an informative tool.
It seems like you'll only make only do sensitivity analysis on inputs that don't cover government policy statements. You're not doing sensitivity analysis on carbon budgets, on the 82% renewable target, on the state targets. It seems a clear limitation to me of the model because, with all due respect to my colleagues, I wouldn't be taking politicians' promises as gospel. That's what you seem to do for your modelling, that, OK, the politician says this is going to happen, we'll just assume that happens.
So I guess what we're trying to do is use the ISP as an information tool to make sure that people are aware of what needs to happen in the power system, whether that's levels of generation, levels of storage, the types of transmission projects that will help to connect all that together to deliver that reliable and secure supply, because we know that's absolutely critical, and how do we meet those emissions goals, which we declare as inputs, and our approach is how do you convert those emissions goals into what needs to happen in the power system to inform everybody, the industry, the market, investors, policymakers, other decision makers, as to what needs to happen to the power system to make sure that we can continue to deliver a reliable and secure supply for electricity consumers.
But I suppose the issue here is we're facing multiple billion, in the tens of billions of dollars now, costs on transmission going to the grid, which we'll all have to pay for. And basically the most important planning document for that transmission is completely useless at judging whether or not we could avoid those costs. Because you admit that your assumptions effectively generate the outcome that HumeLink must be built, when we could maybe have different assumptions or different policy choices which would avoid those costs and avoid consumers paying those costs.
Senator,
your modelling doesn't tell us anything about that question.
The objective of the integrated system plan is not to evaluate government policy. It's to determine, in order to deliver secure and reliable electricity to consumers with an input of government policies, and not politicians' promises but actual policies, then what is required to invest in generation, in storage and in transmission in order to deliver
But I
that.
thought,
That
I
is the
mean,
purpose of the ISP.
and I've been out of the game a little while and I haven't followed it as closely as I used to, but I thought the whole point of the ISP was to sort of plan our transmission network, or one of the key objectives. Is that right or wrong?
Well, the integrated system plan is the roadmap through to 2050 of what is required to meet secure and reliable electricity demand needs of consumers throughout the national electricity market, taking as an input all of the things in the inputs, assumptions and scenarios, which of course include government policy as we've outlined.
It is one of the key objectives to best plan our transmission network.
What it defines then is the optimal development path for transmission development in order to meet those electricity needs.
But the problem now is that the way government policies are working through your model is it makes a mockery of that process, that effectively the government policy statements effectively give you the conclusion of a certain transmission network requirements.
And I guess
because they're so like 82% renewables are so inflexible, right? Like it must be a particular figure at 2030, and it totally reduces our degrees of freedom. And I guess that generates particular outcomes.
So that was my point from earlier, which was the ISP is not a tool to evaluate government policy. Sure. It's a tool to say what needs to be delivered in order for that government policy to succeed, to be delivered. And that is why the emissions in the target statement from the AMC are included in our inputs, assumptions and scenarios report quite transparently. We consult on that and included in each of the different scenarios.
Well, I think what's clear from this inquiry is if the ISP is stuck in gear where it is, we need some other process to evaluate the government policies, because this is not small beer. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars being approved on the basis of the ISP, which is not really doing much, but running some numbers based on government assumptions. Now, look, Chair's going to take the call in a second. I just quickly, and if there is time, I've got other questions, but I did want to quickly ask about Eraring. Apparently another unit is offline right now. Is that correct?
I think it's the same unit, to be honest.
It's the same, is it?
I believe that the same unit that was offline for the period of high demand is still extended, but I have to take that on notice.
But I thought, well, we were told earlier that it was Vale's Point 6 that was unplanned.
For last Wednesday, there were 5 major units that were offline at the time. 3 of them were planned and 2 of them were unplanned. The 3 planned units were Eraring 3, Bayswater 2 and Tallawarra A. Okay. Tallawarra being a gas plant, of course. Right. And the unplanned units were Bayswater 3 and Vales Point 6. Okay,
we now have different information. AEMO clearly told us that Bayswater 3 was planned, and I went through this because I said I've got a thing from What Clarity which says it was unplanned, and they said and came back and said it was planned. Okay, but you're absolutely clear that both Bayswater 3 and Vales Point 6, did you say?
That's my information.
Yep, were both unplanned.
Yep. I'm happy to take it away and I mean, I don't pretend
maybe
to keep
you might want to just have a look at, and AEMO, if they're listening, sorry, no, AER, if they're listening, perhaps needs to just correct the record there as well. Somebody needs to get it right. This is presumably a matter of fact that we can check, but they definitely said that Bayswater 3 was planned, because I specifically raised with them the issue that What Clarity had reported as unplanned. It's good to know What Clarity is right, because I do rely on them a lot. Okay. So the Eraring unit,
Yes.
that's still in planned maintenance, if you like. It's just going on longer than expected. Is that the situation?
If you give me 1 second.
Yep.
You're asking about today?
Well, I've just seen reports this week. I mean, they're not necessarily live reports, but it's been pretty prominent in the news.
Well, I mean,
I've got.
I'll come to the answer in a second, Senator. As you know, generators, in particular major units, take themselves offline for planned and unplanned maintenance. This is just part of the dynamic nature of, frankly, some of our plants are quite old, do require maintenance more than expected. Today, Eraring 3 is offline for most of the day, but comes back a little bit later on. That's the best of my knowledge at this point in time. I couldn't tell you right now whether that's the same outage or a different outage to the one that was from last week. Yes, I can. I understand it went back into service and has come back out again.
Yeah,
well,
that's what
I don't have. I'm not in a position to comment on the health or the operational status of those units. They are questions best directed to the asset owner, in that case, Origin for Eraring. But what we obviously do
But
care
you
about
monitor
is,
this, presumably.
of course we do. Yeah, of course we do.
Yep. I mean, what clarity is? So they're very reliable. What clarity is reporting that it, as you say, it went back online on the afternoon of the 3rd of December, but then it came offline because of a seal failure. But you can't shed any more light on.
Well, I can neither confirm nor deny the specific operational root cause of why it came back or is out again. But I would say that the way that AEMO operates the market is one of the most transparent methods in the world. So we'll publish market notifications, we'll publish our forecasts about which plants are online, who have plans for scheduled maintenance. As soon as those that come off for unscheduled maintenance, we will issue market notices. I take you back to the discussion we were having earlier for the tight conditions that we had for Tuesday and Wednesday last week. We first issued market notices, a week before that, highlighting the need for generators to come back online to meet a period of very low reserves. In fact, at that point in time, it was forecast load shedding, as you're probably aware. And generators respond to that. The fact that we have this level of transparency about the operational status, not is it a tube leak or something or other, not the specifics of the operations, but the fact that we have this level of transparency about who is online, who's not online, who is dispatched and who is not, is a very healthy and I think a very positive element of the national electricity market.
Okay. Well, look, just finally, I asked earlier, it seems strange to me that so many coal units were out for planned maintenance in the last week of November, a week before summer. Is that going to be looked at or reviewed in the future?
Well, there were 5 units out, 3 planned, 2 unplanned. I'd just say at the outset, AEMO doesn't approve or disapprove of generator outages. Generators need to take maintenance, as you well know, to make sure that they're reliable and there for periods when consumer demand is high. In that, I can comment on the specifics of that situation.
Is there any coordination? Sorry, I've been called up. So I thought there was a coordination of maintenance.
There is a coordination mechanism. Firstly, we provide transparency about who is planning to be offline for periods of time. That's through the projected assessments of supply adequacy, so the PASA system.
Yep.
So we provide that visibility. Generators typically then make their own decisions about when to take maintenance based on their own contracting positions, their asset health, their view about weather and forecast pricing. If there is a period of specifically tight supply, then we will undertake a more proactive role in either coordinating or issuing generator recall notices that as we did in advance of the tight period in New South Wales last week. and endeavour to get all units back online to be able to meet consumer demand.
Okay. And look, just finally, before I hand over, have we got the shadow carbon price figure?
We're just getting that for you. We'll have it before we break.
All right, great. I think we've got 15 minutes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Canavan. Once again, thank you for appearing with us and all your cooperation with this inquiry. I think it's been an important one to get done. It's been done in an incredibly short space of time, but we've had enormous support from a very broad range of interested parties that have either submitted or given testimony or both, including yourselves and the other market bodies, twice now. So I'm internally grateful for that support. I think probably a place I'll start, because we were talking about it before. The ECMC's ISP review. Sorry, it's the end of a sitting year. My voice is going to give away before I finish my turn at the call. What did you make of it?
The ECMC.
The review? What did we make of it?
Yeah.
I don't know. It was a review that was started by government. It picked up a lot of feedback that we had received through our own mechanisms in terms of things that were included and weren't included. There's obviously a growing interaction between the electricity and gas arrangements, particularly where gas-powered generation is used for electricity supply, and that will be increasingly important in the future, particularly if the electricity system continues to be used for decarbonisation of other sectors, such as transport and domestic and commercial gas usage in domestic or industrial facilities. So that was a key element which we had flagged, that there is this interaction. Gas-powered generation in the future will have a quite different function and I guess the profile of its generation requirements will be quite different in a future system that's predominantly made up of variable renewable sources with storage, and so that profile of how gas-powered generation is going to be used in 20 years' time is going to be quite different to how it's been used currently or in the past. And so having a greater ability to consider and, I guess, elevate those differences and changes over time, we think will be important. So that we saw that as a positive. Yep. There have been a lot of feedback that we've received about things like the use of consumer energy resources, the coordination or orchestration of those resources, and the ability of the distribution network to play a bigger role has also been something that people have provided us a lot of feedback on. And so the review creating a framework for us to actually include that more comprehensively in not only what we can do in the 2026 ISP, which will be a step forward, but to also continue to improve that over successive ISPs will also be important, and just really testing out how some of the implementation of those resources and how they can be used to support the overall power system in a really constructive way, while also recognising the role of consumers and that they are their resources, will also be important. So enhancing the way in which we look at consumer energy resources and distribution, we also think is a positive. It's not without challenge. That's probably one of the most challenging areas that we've got, because we don't consider that we should become the distribution planner or anything like that, but just actually understanding how those resources will contribute, how the distribution, what is the capacity of the distribution system to be able to contribute and utilise those resources is important. We think it's probably not fully what we have made assumptions about in the past, and so just really understanding that a little bit better and how we can take that into account in the overall. consideration of the transition we think is very important, and of course communicating better. That's something we've always strived to do, to improve our communication tools around the ISP. So, our first ISP was probably a single document. Now we produce an overview, a summary. We have fact sheets about what it is and what it isn't, and we've really tried to make sure that people can get better information about how it works, what it is, what it isn't, what our approach is, how we've taken feedback into account, how we communicate through our webinars, answering questions, all of that kind of improvement activities is a continuous improvement process as we work through consecutive ISPs. So we thought it was timely, and we're really happy with getting some further input into the ISP to make it a better plan going forward.
Sure, please.
A slightly macro perspective, Chair.
Of course.
Energy is an essential service, isn't it? Electricity in particular, society's never been more, has never valued electricity more than it has today, and that value will continue to grow and to grow. So it's right that Australian society has a real interest in our energy systems, and in particular in electricity.
Yep.
And in the last decade, so since 2012, 10 coal-fired power stations have retired. And asset owners today are telling us that they intend to retire their coal-fired power stations soon. They're coming to the end of their life. Mums and dads around the country are investing in solar panels on roofs. Now 4 million homes and businesses have solar on their roofs that contribute additionally 3 gigawatts a year into the power system. The power system is changing fundamentally, and it's right to have focus on a planning mechanism. Countries around the world are focusing on improving their planning to have a better visibility about what the power system needs in the future and how to deliver reliably to consumers around the country. So with that context, all improvements to the integrated system plan are fabulous. We'll take on all feedback. I think the Ministerial Council review and recommendations are helpful. Perhaps you'll have some out of this Senate inquiry, which we'll gratefully take on board, because the objective here is to act in the long-term interests of consumers, and any way we can improve the way that we do that, we are absolutely up for.
Oh, excellent. I'm very pleased to hear that. Because I read the ECMC review, and I only got to see it 2 or 3 weeks ago, so it came late in the inquiry. Otherwise, would have had some questions about that, about it earlier to you and other witnesses. I think it's amazing in that it sets out what have been clearly long-term gaps in the ISP, and both wins and misses. So it was quite a balanced job. But it highlighted things that humble little old backbencher me has been talking about in the chamber or publicly for a long time. Around why aren't we integrating more storage into the system? How do we displace coal if we don't have firm energy? Either through battery, hydro or gas are the 3 key ones, and I think battery and hydro should be playing a much bigger part in all that. And so when it came to this inquiry, it was like there is so much evidence out there that the ISP does have some wins, but there's also an awful lot of failures, and some of those failures, in my mind, are worrying me, because I feel that we are on a path that's not going to get us to any closer quickly to a carbon-free energy system. And that's the low-hanging fruit that we've got in this economy, is getting carbon out of our electricity system and letting it do the heavy lifting on the other bits and pieces of it. Is there a way out of this to look at what's being proposed in the review, all the work that's been put forward to this committee, and in your mind, is there a way to fix the ISP? Because I think there's a large amount of evidence that it's broken in a number of ways. It's wonderfully transparent in terms of inputs, etc. Outputs are really opaque, and we had evidence, towards that. And I went and tested it so many times myself. Like, I'd get it. Well, here's what the stated outcome is. I could not work back or forward from the inputs. Do you think there's a way that it can be done better? I'll let you answer at that point. I've got a few more questions, but...
Sure. Look, there's always room for improvement, no matter how good anything is. And I would actually, I would highlight that around the world, people look at the integrated system plan as the benchmark for planning. I'm not saying it's perfect, right, but it is globally recognised as a very strong planning document. So, is it broken? No, I wouldn't say so. I think we start from a very strong base. But are we up for improvements? Absolutely. To my points before about the need for real clarity and great planning for the essential service that Australian homes and businesses rely on, absolutely. And we'll take on any suggestion. We're busy implementing the improvements as recommended by the Ministerial Council, and to the extent that other recommendations come our way, we're absolutely up for them.
That's terrific to hear, because in part of research for this, I went back through Finkel and Vertican, all have similar sort of criticisms, that have been, that are now showing up in the Energy Minister's review. So I think it's time to take a bit of stock and go, okay, well, how do we put this on more solid ground? How do we ensure that it gets moved forward such that we are making those steps to both absolutely make sure that our grid's secure, that we're getting as much clean, cheap energy into it as possible, that we're not fighting tensions between rooftop solar and utility scale renewable generation, that we are using new loads that are available to us to soak up all that very, very cheap, if not free, or get paid to take energy in the middle of the day. These are all things that were promised as part of the energy transition. And this is what we need our system operator to be able to bring to bear through the planning processes that you do. And we'll discuss it further in the report. I think part of the challenge for AEMO is there's not a lot of accountability between you and other organisations. And, given that you were, I think the word you used was you were given conferred powers. I assume by that you meant the actionable projects in the ISP. There is now almost a no economic test at the beginning and no test along the way as to what projects go forward, other than they're assessed against the ISP, not against good economic metrics that will act as trip gates, such that you don't go from 0.9 billion to 3.3 billion to $4.8 billion for projects, because if that still fits in the optimal development path, in my mind, and I know a lot of the people who have been writing to me through this inquiry, there's an awful lot of that optimal development path you must be able to drive trucks through. So there's just some really things that are intellectually inconsistent that I think really need to be thought through and pulled back into shape and tested against more than the measures that you're testing them against.
I think we'll have to agree to disagree on a couple of fronts. On accountability.
Sure. I'm here seeking your views. So
yeah, look, I mean, I feel, our board feels extremely accountable, and I think we've demonstrated throughout this inquiry how we're accountable. So we'll have to agree to disagree on that. I think we'll have to agree to disagree on project approvals. I mean, the project approval is actually the RIT-T process. It's not the ISP. The ISP confirms whether it's on the optimal development pathway or not. It still needs to go through the RIT-T process, and the regulator approves that. But what we absolutely can agree on is that Australia's energy system, our landscape and the dynamics in the system is different from when the regulatory constructs were set up. Our whole industry was set up in a time of status quo, where driving economic efficiency was the primary objective, and not to say that that's not an objective today, of course it is, but the objective today is recognising that old coal plants are retiring and new generation storage and transmission needs to get built to make sure that Australians have access to the reliable and secure electricity that we deserve as a society. And that is the construct in which we find ourselves. And it's a challenge for all of industry. The need to invest, the need to deliver the generation, the storage, the transmission is very present to make sure that consumers have access to that reliable energy.
And on all of that, I have no argument and no criticism. None of this is meant as criticism, by the way. This inquiry was set up purely to find ways to do things better, such that we can achieve our goals as a nation far faster and far cheaper. So please don't take any of this as criticism. I am going to have to wrap it up there.
Just got that. Show that carbon price.
We'll get the question on notice, and then I'll
I
wrap
just
up.
have one further question also, Chair, if that's all right. When you,
Let's of course.
I go to the
Okay,
Senator
it should be very quick, but yep, whatever. Yep.
Sorry.
I just want to reiterate a caution about what this is, because, as I said before, we do not model a carbon price. We use carbon budgets.
I understand it. Yep.
And so, what can come out of our modelling process is a marginal value of the carbon budget constraint that is in the market modelling process. That's sometimes referred to as a shadow price on carbon, but that's not what we use. For the step change scenario at 2050, and this will be in real July 2023 dollars, because all of the dollars in the ISP are in that real 2023 dollars. The marginal value of the carbon budget constraint is $256 per tonne of CO2 emissions. I can also give you the value at the equivalent time of how the Energy Minister set the value of emissions reduction for comparison purposes. That is at that time at $420 per tonne of carbon emissions in 2050, and that of course is also in July 2023 dollars.
On notice, could you get us the prices or the figures for both of those series for the step change for all the years up to 2050? Is that okay?
That will come out of our modelling, but I would caution that's not something that's used, and there's a lot of interactions.
But I'm not going to delay the committee by getting you to read out every year, but if you could provide every year for us on notice, that would be great. Thank you.
Deputy Chair.
thank you. I'd just like to take you back to the previous exchange with Senator Canavan. There's a pretty serious allegation in there, and I'm happy for you to take this on notice. But do you believe that there was any inappropriate interference from the department in setting the ISP scenarios?
From our perspective, we don't. We obviously interact with all governments on their policies, as I said before, to make sure that we understand, what they are, how they're proposed to be implemented, what stage they're at in terms of legislative implementation, budget considerations, what they're using, so that we can effectively model those policies. And in the case of the 82%, that was a normal
kind of interaction and discussion around what was a shift from something that was a policy back in the 2022 ISP, wasn't a policy in the 2022 ISP to becoming a policy that needed to be an input in the 2024 ISP. There's inevitably going to be a transition from not including it as a constraint to including it as a constraint on that continuum, and that was obviously occurring sometime around that middle of 2023 timeframe when there was this email exchange, and there were probably other interactions to understand, exactly how that was going to be calculated. I would see that as a very normal and reasonable interaction of an organisation that's trying to model government policies in terms of making sure we understand how that is to occur in our work.
Okay. If I could ask you just to maybe review the Hansard and just consider whether there's anything else you want to say regarding those allegations from Senator Canavan. Thank you.
On that note, I have a script I have to read. Thank you, Fatima. Can I thank everyone for their evidence today? The committee will report to the Senate on Friday, 20 December, and requests that answers to questions taken on notice are provided to the committee secretariat by close of business Thursday, 12 December 2024. And again, can I thank Australian Energy Market Operator, the other market bodies that appeared today, the very many witnesses we had and the submissions that we received. It has been a whirlwind piece of work that the Secretariat will vigorously nod alongside me on. I'm looking forward to how it's received once it's tabled.
We look forward to the report. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate.